Desert Oracle Radio, the voice of the desert.
Night has fallen on the desert, the sublime southwestern realm of the Joshua Tree and the Jackalope. From East California to West Texas, the wildest part of America. Another winter storm blasting the mountains and the Mojave beyond, and I awoke to snow-dusted hills. Preferable to the cold, driving rain of the morning previous, when, heroically, the dog and I completed the usual morning walk up to the ridgeline. But when we returned home, he was unwilling to go outside again, even to investigate the bunnies. I dried him off, and he slept by the fireplace, soaking up heat instead of rainwater. The creatures continue their return to this little bit of desert they call home, from spring to late autumn at least. The relative protection of this fenced acre or so, safe from the wrecking crews of yard workers and poison sprays, as long as I'm around. The Mojave cottontails are fattening up on whatever green sprouts appear. My favorite pair of mourning doves, who barely step aside for me, so comfortable they've become these past 5 springs on my patio. The hummingbirds are back too. Glory be. Which means glory be to God if you've grown up in the past 40 years or so and never heard the whole phrase. I've been listening to one of my favorite history books again, Will Durant's Caesar and Christ. The audiobook version read by Grover Gardner, my favorite American narrator. We all have our various preferences, which we are nearly helpless at keeping to ourselves. And my preferred audiobook narrator is a British voice of approximately 75 years old, mellowed by scotch and cigar. Maybe you know the type. Latin, Greek, and French phrases are expertly yet casually pronounced, and you can almost see a wiry, gray-haired eyebrow raised slightly when some outrageous detail is delivered in deadpan style. Like, the dead king was found next to his beloved sheep who also died of injuries, etc. The gold standard, a phrase we keep using despite gold no longer being the standard and the unsolved, unresolved mystery of Fort Knox, is Charlton Griffin, best known for his rich readings of the Sherlock Holmes stories and some M. Somerset Maugham books. Griffin's reading of the unabridged Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that's the big one. But Will Durant was American, a great American who, over 40 years and 11 volumes, taught millions the story of civilization. As he titled his life's work, joined by his wife and longtime researcher Ariel Durant as co-author on the final 5 volumes. Grover Gardner is the perfect reader for these immensely popular and philosophically deep and narratively rich histories. We are unlikely to again see a time when 11-volume, 14,000-page Pulitzer-winning world histories become best-selling blockbusters and are actually read by millions of middle-class people for self-edification, self-enlightenment. But these titles remain popular today as audiobooks and even YouTube clips for the younger people who can't concentrate for more than a few minutes. Caesar and Christ, the third book in the series, takes us from the early days of Rome to its embrace of Christianity during the waning days of the Roman Empire. And while I've read the hardcover at various points in my life, initially in 1997, I think, and I've listened to the audiobook several times over the past 10 years or so, this time around I hear every argument regarding the decline of our own civilization in this text from 1944. And yeah, the decline of our civilization is real and obvious to all but the angriest and loudest deniers, with their endless streams of spittle-sprayed obscenities. This painful decline, and that's why everybody's so crazy now. Everybody. It has reached every level of society it is impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. Reading and math comprehension have plummeted, especially among people holding academic degrees, people who have taken academic tests, with the collapse measurable across the Western world beginning very strongly in 2013. That's the year my old flip phone fell out of my pocket while I was meditating under a juniper along the Joshua Tree National Park boundary. An event I recall with some detail because it ended my avoidance of the iPhone. Because it had rained that afternoon, and by the time I returned to the spot and found my old, what was it, a Motorola, Samsung? Whatever it was, I got soaked through and through. I tried the old bag of rice trick, the usual stuff. And then I went down to the Apple store in Palm Desert and bought my first iPhone. Only when my hearing started to fade, another 5 or so years later, did I start using it with any regularity, and that was to listen to audiobooks when the ringing in the ear got bad. But I could have done that with a $20 MP3 player. From elderly grandmas withdrawing their life savings for Brad Pitt texting from Nigeria to 28-year-olds unable to understand credit card loan interest, a sort of baffled ignorance is the default state of mind. Every day, another fantastical bit of nonsense makes the rounds again. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and cable news for the oldest and slowest. Space aliens crash their flying saucers here, but they're really angels, and you need to pay some UFO grifter $25,000 a year to be in the know.
Desert Oracle Radio.
Happy Ides of March, happy St. Patrick's Day, and happy 5-year anniversary of the COVID-19 lockdown. The beginning of it, anyway. 15 days to slow the spread. Not a great slogan for what it cost, but that's what we got. Much of the world is much the same as it was 5 years ago. Same iPhones in our pockets, same president, same daylight savings time. I am living proof of all that, the basic sameness of the situation, as I send you this transmission from the same place where I've been for these last long 5 years, since America and most of the world closed for business. Well, that's not true. Closed for humanity, for society, for family, weddings, beach days, playgrounds, classrooms, but open for business. A very weird time for America. An interesting time in America. A time when you literally could not say what was on your mind unless you hid it within a parable. The parable is, for those of you who haven't touched a Bible in a while, a fable or short story that teaches a moral or a wisdom lesson. Parable from the Greek parabole, meaning comparison or contrast, or an allegory in this case, or a parabolic mirror, referring to the juxtaposition of cone and plane. Diocles named this device some 2 centuries before the birth of Christ. So if you listen to the radio episodes from 2020, all of which are still available on the corporate computer world podcast platforms, because they never attracted the ire of the authorities, the censors, the fact-check departments, you will hear many parables about our strange days, our enforced isolation of that time, that era, stories of animals, of dreams, of spaceships. One of the early parables in the weeks before lockdown, but when those with eyes to see and ears to listen knew it was coming, was about a rocket to Mars, about one-way flights, that sort of thing. Sometimes the visions get tied up with the parables. Not too many days after the forced lockdown, including, incredibly, the locking down of open-air public beaches, public parks, and the national parks, my then 11-year-old son and I were hiking along the edge of our local national park with the dog, as we've been doing every day for all the years we've lived here in this area. And I saw a couple of the buzz-cut weightlifting bros, sort of law enforcement rangers, parked up there with their NPS police vehicle, where an old dirt road enters the park's backcountry. And they're staring us down with their hands on their guns. On their holstered guns, to be precise. But ready to shoot these 2 people, quite obviously members of the same family, walking their dog outside on a sunny spring day. And these cops, these people trusted with motor vehicles and firearms, are standing there like steroid Stepford wives, and my son and I looked at each other, amused and baffled by these square heads with dead eyes, programmed to kill. I tormented the goons for a while for sport, smiling, acting dumb, asking where they lived, asking who they were intending to shoot. Mind you, we never made any attempt to cross the magic line where it was illegal to be outside, being quite satisfied with the thousands of square miles of identical open desert on our side, our neighborhood. After that, I figured I'd ignore the whole production as much as possible. and avoid places where I might run into the dead-eyed pandemic goons. Generally, I had a pretty good 2-year collapse of society. Can't say the same for my sons, who lost prime years of their life. They did, though, gain an early education in bureaucratic evil and the herd mentality of the Zoom meeting zombie class that dominated human existence in the years that followed. Good lessons to learn. Better to toughen up and know your enemy. But overall, compared to the nightmare lives of people stuck in apartment buildings and crowded cities, we had a relatively benign collapse out here. Because there was very little society here to collapse to begin with. In a Mojave Desert, small town where you pretty much have to drive an hour to do anything, from getting a tolerable dinner out to going to Trader Joe's or Target, as people like to do, or Costco. I guess that's the standard of an actual functioning community in the early 21st century. In America, an enormous Costco at the freeway off-ramp. Well, as soon as it was apparent that the mask thing was a mass delusion that was not worth going to war for, I ordered a couple of special black cloth masks to drape over my beard like some Victorian mourning curtain, because the regular rubber band masks were made for, I don't know what, like hobbits with little muzzles. And I just left those cloth masks in the glove box in the car in case I went somewhere requiring this costuming, which happened rarely because there wasn't anywhere to go. These mail-order Black Bandit masks were fairly comfortable the few times I wore one, and they made me look fairly menacing. So the only time anybody ever gave me any guff was when I had a medical appointment a year or two later. And they forced me to wear the little rubber band mask. So I stretched that over the other one, so it was sort of like a duckbill. Like a Daffy Duck sort of thing. Not a very dignified time for any of us. I just moved into the place where I still am. I don't like hanging around the same place for too long. It gets me down. It bums me out. 5 years is too long. Like that Merle Haggard song says, my hat can't hang on the same nail too long. My ears can't stand to hear the same old song. The place where I live has gone through a whole economic and pop cultural boom and bust and back down the other side again in those years since. People barely remember it now. It's like some mostly forgotten dream. When the government decided we were allowed to go outside again, I guess late that spring, I can't remember exactly. Well, people just flooded the Joshua Tree area. This was true in small towns near national parks all over the country because California was obviously going to be shut down long term. Those who could leave packed up, sold their houses to Airbnb grifters, and headed for wherever kids could still go to school, where churches were open again, where the shops and restaurants and bars, sporting events had opened up. Arizona, Texas, and Florida, I suppose. And within a few months of moving into my house, I had no neighbors. They were all gone. International air travel was all but shut down. Domestic air travel was sort of halfway going again. By then, you'd put the peanuts in your mouth real quick when you pull the mask down, breathe a little bit, have a sip of your drink, point the little air vent on you. It's hot under that thing. Good that everybody's pulling those things on and off, sitting right next to each other in a narrow tube. Anyway, people wanted to travel, and they were mostly limited to car travel. All the fake email jobs and the video meeting jobs, you could do that from anywhere. Do it from bed. Do it from a hot tub in the desert. Why not? We had mob scenes for that first year, and then by the end of the second year, it had died down. But now I've got empty houses for sale up and down my road. I'm surrounded by them, like everybody who's still out here, I suppose. I did a lot of work on the house during that first year, like a lot of us. I just moved into the place. A few months previous, it needed some work, as they say. Bring your toolbox, as they say. If the real estate ad says bring your toolbox, that means it's a tear down at best and a Superfund site at worst. So, I had workers and contractors and appliance installation guys coming and going all the time. They would knock back off 6 or 8 feet away from the door, and they'd have their little mask tight over their whiskers. The guys would ask if they should wear the mask inside, and I'd say, no, I don't care. In summertime, you could see them sweating underneath those things, and the red lines on the face. And with a regular daily traffic of those guys, along with the various delivery people, plumbers, etc., it was sort of fun. Different people to talk with all the time. I like people who work for a living, who know how to do things, people with a trade. And then I'd go to the hardware store or the Home Depot when I had to, and the places are full of contractors, laborers, and at first they have bandanas tied around their sunburned necks and sort of hold them up halfway over their mouths as they walk past the masking required signs everywhere. And the bandana drops before they're all the way through the automatic doors. Sometimes a guy would pull his t-shirt up over his mouth as he walked in, and the neck was all stretched out because he's been doing that all day. But usually everybody had what we unaffectionately referred to as a chin diaper. If you're a man with some sort of job that requires some sort of physical activity or skill, you were rocking the chin diaper. Now, being a small publisher selling a physical product primarily to vacationers, day trippers, out-of-towners, campers, my little business ground to a halt overnight when the lockdown first hit, as was the case for the hundreds of millions of self-employed people around the world. And America is the land of the self-employed, the small business person. In fact, more than 90% of all U.S. businesses are small ones. 30 million businesses employing 60 million Americans. Often a married couple, maybe a father and son, like Sanford and Son, if you remember that. Or maybe a couple of lawyers who work together in a partnership, Cagney and Lacey or something. I had a book due to a New York publisher. That was something that used to be a big deal. So there was work to be done on that, and I worked on an issue of the little periodical, but lacked the money to pay the printers and the postage to mail it out. The most common and persistent problem with all small publishers, I've sadly come to learn in recent years. And there were no more Desert Oracle live shows, not until the second half of the following year. You see, Santa Minerva had smiled upon me late in life and had provided me with a couple of years of regular Desert Oracle events and performances prior to the lockdown, I mean. I do love putting on those live shows. We used to do monthly campfire stories down in Palm Springs at this hotel that was real hot with the millennials back then. Big crowds for those things, always a lot of fun. And there were shows at Palm Springs Art Museum, the Astronomy Arts Amphitheater up by North Joshua Tree, and at Amboy Crater and the High Desert Nature Museum, all so much fun. And all that came to a crashing halt as well. I had to give up my little homestead cabin, the Desert Oracle office on the highway in Joshua Tree. Started doing the radio show from home, or within the little studio behind the house. Read a lot of books, drank a lot of wine, watched a lot of classic movies with the kids, took the usual long hikes every day, haters be damned. It was a lot easier than what many people had to go through, like not being allowed to see their parents in the senior housing, the assisted care facilities. Like being fired from their jobs, ostracized by their communities for saying the wrong thing during those long years of insanity, thinking the wrong thoughts. Well, 5 years later, all we can be sure of is this will never happen again, not like it did 5 years ago. Even the Chinese rose up and said enough. In Chinese, probably. People who know very well what happens to those who dissent in a totalitarian state. But they stood up and they won. The CCP backed down. COVID-0 was dropped down the memory hole with the rest of the nonsense, the inconvenient truth. Now even the New York Times admits what some of us knew in late 2019 when a suspiciously lethal common cold virus suddenly appeared outside the U.S. Centers for Disease Control Biological Weapons Lab in Wuhan, China. I'll never forget those TikTok video clips of people falling dead in the streets of Wuhan, Christmas time, 2019. I guess today those clips could be easily made with some AI video creation tool that can't be disabled in Photoshop or whatever. Good night from the voice of the desert.